2018 ജൂലൈ 26 സുപ്രീം കോടതിയിൽ തിരക്കിട്ട വാദപ്രതിവാദങ്ങൾ നടക്കുന്നു. വിഷയം മറ്റൊന്നുമല്ല, ശബരിമല ക്ഷേത്രത്തിലെ യുവതീ പ്രവേശനം. മറ്റു രണ്ട് കക്ഷികൾക്കുമായി ഹാജരായ മുതിർന്ന അഭിഭാഷകർ വാദങ്ങൾ പൂർത്തീകരിച്ച് സ്ഥാനങ്ങളിലേക്ക് മടങ്ങിയെത്തുന്നു. സമയം 12:45. കോടതി ഉച്ചയൂണിനായി പിരിയാൻ 6 മിനിറ്റുകൾ മാത്രം ബാക്കി. പീപ്പിൾസ് ഫോർ ധർമ്മ എന്ന കൂട്ടായ്മയ്ക്ക് വേണ്ടി ഹാജരാകാനെത്തിയ യുവ അഭിഭാഷകന്റെ ഊഴമാണ് അടുത്തത്. കോടതി മുറിയിലെ മറ്റുള്ള അഭിഭാഷകരുമായി താരതമ്യം ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ അദ്ദേഹം പുതുമുഖമാണ്. പുതിയ വാദങ്ങളൊന്നും ഉയർന്നേക്കില്ല എന്നിടത്തു നിന്ന് ആ യുവാവ് തുടങ്ങിവച്ചു. ക്ഷേത്രം അവർക്കായി വാദിച്ച എല്ലാം ഉറപ്പിച്ചു. സ്ത്രീകൾ അവരുടെ അവകാശങ്ങളെ ചോദ്യം ചെയ്തു. ക്ഷേത്രത്തിൽ ഒരു ദേവതയുണ്ട്, പ്രതിഷ്ഠയുണ്ട്. നൈഷ്ഠിക ബ്രഹ്മചാരിയായ അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ അവകാശങ്ങൾക്കു വേണ്ടി ആരാണ് വാദിക്കുക? ഈ വാക്കുകൾ ചർച്ചയാക്കപ്പെട്ടു. ഭാരതത്തിൽ എല്ലായിടത്തുമുള്ള ക്ഷേത്രങ്ങളിലേതുപോലെയല്ല ശബരിമല ക്ഷേത്രം എന്നുള്ള ചർച്ചകളും ഉയർന്നുവന്നു. പല കോണിൽ നിന്നും ലേഖനങ്ങൾ പ്രത്യക്ഷപ്പെട്ടു. അതുവരെയുണ്ടായ ഏകപക്ഷീയമായ വാദങ്ങൾ മയപ്പെട്ടു. സ്ത്രീ പ്രവേശനമല്ല, യുവതീ പ്രവേശനമാണ് ശബരിമലയിൽ ഒഴിവാക്കപ്പെട്ടിട്ടുള്ളതെന്നുള്ള വാസ്തവവും അതിനു പിന്നിലെ ആചാരപരമായ കാരണങ്ങളും ചർച്ചയാക്കപ്പെട്ടു. അതെ, അന്ന് ആ കോടതി മുറിയിൽ ഉയർന്ന ശബ്ദം മറ്റാരുടേതുമല്ല, സാക്ഷാൽ സായി ദീപകിന്റേതാണ്. അന്നാണ് മലയാളികൾ ശരിക്കും ആ പേര് കേട്ടു തുടങ്ങിയത്. അഡ്വക്കേറ്റ് സായി ദീപക്. 1985 ഹൈദരാബാദിലെ ഒരു തമിഴ് കുടുംബത്തിൽ ജനനം. പ്രാഥമിക വിദ്യാഭ്യാസത്തിനു ശേഷം കാൺപൂർ IITയിൽ നിന്നും നിയമത്തിലും അണ്ണാ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിൽ നിന്ന് മെക്കാനിക്കൽ എഞ്ചിനീയറിംഗിലും ബിരുദങ്ങൾ നേടിയ സായി ദീപക് പ്രൊഫഷനായി തെരഞ്ഞെടുത്തത് അഭിഭാഷക വൃത്തിയാണ്. 2010 മുതൽ ഡൽഹി ഹൈക്കോടതിയിലും സുപ്രീം കോടതിയിലും പ്രാക്ടീസ് ചെയ്യുന്നു. സംവാദവേദികളിൽ ദേശീയ പക്ഷത്ത് നിന്ന് വാദിച്ച ശ്രദ്ധേയനായ സായിയുടെ മുന്നിൽ ശശി തരൂർ, അസദുദ്ദീൻ ഒവൈസി തുടങ്ങി നിരവധി പ്രമുഖർ മുട്ടുമടക്കിയ അവസരങ്ങളുണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. സാമൂഹ്യ മാധ്യമയിടങ്ങളിലെ ഇടത് ജിഹാദി കൂട്ടായ്മകളെ പ്രതിരോധിച്ച് തോൽപ്പിക്കാൻ സായി ദീപക് ഉൾപ്പെട്ട ഒരു വിഭാഗം യുവാക്കൾക്ക് സാധിച്ചു. ഇന്ത്യ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ഭാരത് എന്ന അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ പുസ്തകത്തിന് വലിയ പ്രചാരമാണ് ലഭിച്ചത്. ഇന്നും ആമസോൺ ബുക്സിൽ ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ വിൽക്കുന്ന പുസ്തകങ്ങളിലൊന്നാണ് ഇന്ത്യ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ഭാരത്. ഭാരതം ചർച്ച ചെയ്ത, ഭാരതത്തെക്കൊണ്ട് ചർച്ച ചെയ്യിപ്പിച്ച യുവപ്രതിഭ, അഭിഭാഷകൻ, എഴുത്തുകാരൻ, വാഗ്മി സായി ദീപക്കാണ് ഇന്ന് ദി ബിഗ് ഇന്റർവ്യൂവിൽ ചീഫ് എഡിറ്റർ പ്രദീപ് പിള്ളയ്ക്കൊപ്പം ചേരുന്നത്.
നമസ്തേ. ഇന്നത്തെ അതിഥിയെ പരിചയപ്പെടുത്തുക എളുപ്പമാണ്, എന്നാൽ ദുഷ്കരവുമാണ്. ജെ സായി ദീപക് അഥവാ അഡ്വക്കേറ്റ് ജെ സായി ദീപക്. മലയാളികൾ ഏറ്റവും അധികം തിരിച്ചറിയുന്നത് അയ്യപ്പ ഭക്തർക്ക് വേണ്ടി സുപ്രീം കോടതിയിൽ പോരാടിയ അഭിഭാഷകൻ, ശ്രീ പത്മനാഭ സ്വാമി ക്ഷേത്ര വിഷയത്തിൽ ഇടപെട്ട് ഭക്തർക്ക്, തന്ത്രിക്ക് അനുകൂലമായ നിലപാടിലേക്ക് എത്തിച്ച അഭിഭാഷകൻ. അതിനൊക്കെ അപ്പുറം ഡീകോളനൈസേഷൻ എന്ന ഇന്ത്യക്കാർക്ക് സുപരിചിതമല്ലാത്ത ഒരു തത്വം, ഒരു വസ്തുത അവതരിപ്പിച്ച് പുസ്തകങ്ങളിലൂടെയും ഇന്ത്യ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ഭാരത്, പിന്നെ ഇന്ത്യ, ഭാരത് ആൻഡ് പാകിസ്ഥാൻ, ദ കോൺസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂഷണൽ ജേർണി ഓഫ് എ സാൻഡ്വിച്ച് സിവിലൈസേഷൻ, അങ്ങനെ ഭാരതത്തിന്റെ സ്വത്വം വീണ്ടെടുക്കാൻ, അത് ഇൻസ്റ്റിൽ ചെയ്യാൻ നടത്തുന്ന ഒരു പോരാട്ടം. വളരെയധികം ഡിമാൻഡുള്ള പ്രഭാഷകൻ, സോഷ്യൽ മീഡിയയിൽ, യൂട്യൂബിൽ വളരെ വൈറലായിട്ടുള്ള ഒട്ടനവധി പ്രസംഗങ്ങളുടെ ഉപജ്ഞാതാവ്. വെൽക്കം ടു ജനം TV, ശ്രീ സായി ദീപക്.
നമസ്കാരം.
നമസ്കാരം. Engineering graduate moving into IIT is quite natural. Engineering graduate moving into IIT to do law, where did that twist come?
One, I think it was a quirk of circumstance and perhaps the product of destiny. But one of the key milestones in my life, or maybe a point of inflection, which informed the decision, was the 2004 defeat of Sri Vajpayee, because I was still in engineering then. The India Shining campaign had flopped, and there were repercussions that people like me had to face on the campus because of our opinions on the subject. I've always been fairly vocal on where I stand on some of these issues. And I wanted to understand why is it that our own people lack unity, and what is it about our culture that some of us hate. And I wanted to understand how the system works. Civil services was certainly one of the options. That was one of the cards on the table. It just so happens that cracking the exam is just one aspect, surviving in the system is another aspect. I wasn't sure I could do the latter. And I felt that I needed a better option which would give me a position to speak on the subject. And that's when I came across this program at IIT Kharagpur, which was law meant for engineers, doctors, and MBAs with a science background. This program was started in 2006. It's the only program of its kind in Bharat till date. I'm a product of the first batch, 2006 to 2009. And ever since, I think I've been grateful to the gods for helping me make the transition.
To laymen like us, the freedom struggle was a simple theory.
Right.
Hindustan fought for independence.
Right.
Britishers gave us independence. Nehru and Jinnah fought for prime ministership.
Right.
Mahatma Gandhi intervened. Pakistan was formed.
Right.
India was formed.
Right.
You have marked certain years
Right.
in your books. 1707, 1905,
Right.
1906. One, the Mughal Empire's time. Next, when Bengal was partitioned.
Right.
And next, the politically separatist movement of All India Muslim League.
Right. Right.
So you have kind of rewritten or reinterpreted the whole theory of the formation of Pakistan. You say it's been there, the seeds were sown.
Correct.
And was on.
Correct.
Can you throw some light on this theory? Because
So I think as part of school textbooks or even in history programs across the country, there is something called as received wisdom, which has never been questioned so far. Because I think under the first Prime Minister, coupled with a clique of Nehruvian Marxist historiographers, Bharat's history has been rewritten and rewritten in a fashion which has got nothing to do with facts. There was a predetermined agenda, and facts were selectively presented and sometimes even distorted fully to meet that political as well as cultural narrative. I don't know what the intentions were, but the consequences were certainly bad for Bharat, and certainly terrible and catastrophic for Hindus in particular. I wanted to understand when Travancore has a specific deity, the Raja has a specific deity, Cochin has a specific deity, Mewar has a specific deity, then the Gajapati of Odisha has a specific deity, Chamundeshwari is the titular deity of Mysore. How is it that all these princely states with a very clear religious character went on to become a secular Bharat? When the units are not secular, how does the whole become secular? That was the question that I had to ask myself. And this was a product of the research that we did for the Padmanabha Swami temple treasure case. Because we had to understand the nature of the relationship between the Travancore-Cochin state and the Indian Union. We had to understand the documents and how the Travancore family fought for preservation of its rights with respect to the Padmanabha Swami temple. Not because of the money or anything else, but because there is a traditional, customary connection between the temple and the family. And of course, you know the controversy that happened surrounding the family and the temple, unfortunately. So when we went through the research, we felt that there is a fantastic story to be told. And a lot of people had already started asking me to write a book by then, because I had certain experience before the constitutional courts of this country, particularly in matters of civilizational importance. So the idea was to understand what is the relationship between the Bharatiya civilization and the Bharatiya Samvidhan or the constitution. Do they share a friendly relationship or are they pitted against each other? The lockdown gave me an opportunity to take a small break because of the lockdown. I think we had about 3 to 4 months. That gave me an opportunity to read up a lot more. And I was fortunate enough to meet quite a few people who gave me what I call the framework to look at. I put both together, and that's how the first book came about, which is India That Is Bharat. And I started writing the second book in 2022 to understand the journey towards the partition of Bharat. And contrary to popular perception, I don't think it was the product of mere political aspirations and ambitions of two different individuals. And I'm not even sure we had a strong independence movement going. The better part of the literature says that at least until the 1920s, we were aspiring to be dominions or dominion of the British Empire. And we were fairly proud of being a dominion of the British Empire, going by what some of the vocal leaders of the movement have said. So at one point it was Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and then, or rather Vande Mataram, and then it became Vande Mata Pitarau, where Mata is Bharat and Pitarau is England. That is the stated position in Congress documents. So I wanted to understand, why is it that we are conveniently and comfortably buying ahistoric history, and what is this need to buy fiction when facts speak to the contrary? And therefore I wrote the second book, where I trace the origins of the Pakistan movement right until the 17th or at least the 18th century. That is immediately after the fall of the Mughal Empire, after the death of Aurangzeb in 1707. Saying when political Islam fell, religious Islam stood up and decided to re-energize the Muslim population of the subcontinent, of the Indian subcontinent. And how it gradually but certainly and surely led towards the direction of Pakistan was something that I wanted to show. And since Shri Veer Savarkar is constantly blamed for having foisted the two-nation theory, I wanted to show that Veer Savarkar was a 5-year-old, or even was not even born when the two-nation theory was first propounded by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, the founder of what is today known as the Aligarh Muslim University. Previously it was called the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College. Let's call it the Mao College. Okay. So these aspects I wanted to bring to the public. And fortunately, by the time of the launch of the first book in 2021 and the launch of the second book in August 2022, there was a fair bit of audience that was willing to consume the content that I had put out through lectures and other engagements. And I'm happy that ultimately they decided to support both the books. And the books together have sold over 2.5 lakh copies in the last 2 years, and worldwide as well. It has even been ranked #1 in the constitutional category on Kindle in the US, not even in Bharat. So this shows more than anything else that the audience is hungry for content which shows history in correct light.
I refuse to call him Mahatma. I've never called him Mahatma. I've never called him Mahatma. I will never call him Mahatma. Why?
I took this position because when you deify a political leader or a politician, then you rarely end up doing an objective analysis of their pluses and minuses. And therefore I wanted to understand Sri Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi from a very real perspective, on the basis of his conduct, on the basis of his speeches, on the basis of his decisions, which obviously had a long-term consequence for Bharat, and we continue to pay the price in one way or the other, notwithstanding the fact that he certainly had fantastic ideas on how to decolonize Bharat. Let me also say that. There are both sides to the person. But ultimately, when you do an analysis of the person, it's almost like a balance sheet. You have to find out, was it overwhelmingly good or bad? That's a question that you have to ask. And anybody in public life cannot escape that kind of scrutiny. My sense is that Bharat's first minority leader was Sri Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, because he rose to power within the Congress after the demise of Sri Tilak in August 1920 on the strength of the Khilafatists. And according to me, that was the first Islamist movement in modern Bharatiya history, which had set the tone and had set the ball rolling for the partition of Bharat on religious lines. Because a movement that was lying in wait for an opportunity was finally given an opportunity on a platter by a so-called Hindu leader. So this is why I refuse to call him Mahatma, coupled with his inexplicable conduct at the time of riots, particularly during partition, when Hindu blood was being spilt left, right and center. I wanted to do a fairly, let's call it a hit reset button, to see before Mahatma, what was he, and whether the title was bestowed upon him with justification, or did he end up taking advantage of the title. In the process, he became the Pied Piper who was walking the Hindu population towards what I thought was fairly clear genocide. And that's why I have my reservations about calling him Mahatma.
Well, you have now put across a solid theory wherein you said, I'm coming to decolonization.
Right.
Wherein you said the Britishers left.
Right.
What they left behind, or what we called independence, was probably geographical independence.
Correct.
Everything else remained.
Correct.
Probably the civilization, India's consciousness,
Right.
India's soul, India's culture, India's civilization were
Right.
either diluted polluted, or robbed.
Right.
That's what we were trying to tell us?
So, I'm looking at two different waves of colonization of Bharat. One is before the European came to Bharat. And the first European colonizer was the Portuguese. First he landed here, and then he bought, or rather he was the one to establish what we know as Madras today. It was the Portuguese who destroyed the Kapalishwar temple, which was originally situated on the banks of, or rather on the shores of the ocean. And then they built what is today known as the St. Thomas Basilica on Mount Road. So if you look at Skandapuran, that is the original location of Mylapore Kapalishwar temple, and then it had to be shifted to its current location. So the Shivalingam which was there had to be ultimately shifted. And this was not an isolated conduct because the Portuguese indulged in what is known as the Goan Inquisition, one of the worst inquisitorial phases in Christian history in its entire existence, which is rarely spoken about or taught. Today, when you look at a lot of people who confidently and maybe with a certain degree of supremacy claim Portuguese origins, they are not Portuguese at all. Their ancestors were Hindus. They were all driven out. Several communities with surnames such as Pai, who you find in Kerala today, are originally from Goa, who had to leave that place because of the genocidal, let's say, lust of the Portuguese, along with the Catholic Church of that time. So when you look at this history, then you ask, okay, so what was the position before? Prior to the arrival of the Christian European colonizer, we also had a massive wave of genocidal invasions, starting from, most people think that it started with the arrival of Muhammad bin Qasim in 712 CE, but it started much before that. In the 7th century itself, they had started probing Gujarat and Sindh, but they were repelled successfully. And for the first time, Muhammad bin Qasim gained success in 712 CE. Then for 3 centuries, they are unable to cross the Sindh because of Hindu resistance. And then starts the Gori Ghazni wave, which leads to serious loss of territory and culture. Now, in light of that, I had to ask myself, a culture which was so confident of its identity and which was responding to invasions in a language that the invader understood, why did it suddenly develop a serious inferiority complex post the arrival of the Christian European colonizer? Why is it that we started doubting the existence of our society as a civilized society, as a fair and just society, as an advanced society? Why did we start asking those questions of ourselves? And then I realized that the root cause is the education system, because our education system traces its origins to 1835. When for the first time they undertook a detailed survey of the number of Veda Pathashalas and Gurukuls across the country, and they realized that this is where the strength of Bharat still lies. And despite the invasions, it continues to have a clear identity of its own, and therefore they wanted to finish it and weed it out lock, stock and barrel. There's a fantastic book by Sri Dharampalji called The Beautiful Tree, where he shows very clearly that contrary to popular perception and the propaganda that is actually pushed in the name of communism, Bharat's Gurukulas have always been open to all the Chaturvarnas, and the numbers are crystal clear. In fact, the number of people who are so-called non-Brahmins outnumbered obviously the Brahmins, and fourth Varna was heavily dominant as students and as teachers in these Gurukulas, because there were different subjects who had different experts. Okay, so how is it that these aspects were completely submerged and brushed under the carpet? I think it's the product of the education system. And therefore, it is the education system that gave us new ideas about our society, about what is political independence, about religion and whatnot. So there is the concept of conversion to another religion. There is the concept of converting the religion itself. So either you can convert from Hinduism to Christianity, or you can create a new Christianized Hinduism. And that is effectively the product of the English education system. And so if you look at how our ideas changed, and we developed a serious inferiority complex, it starts with the introduction and the entrenchment of the English education system. And most of our so-called independence leaders were products of this system. There were certainly some fantastic exceptions who managed to retain their respect for this country and its civilization despite the education system. But that was more a matter of probability and chance, not by design. So the idea was to show how while the white man left, he left back brown white men. the brown sahibs as we call them today, who significantly took forward the very same mentality, the very same approach to the native civilization as the white man. So I see that as a handover of power and less of independence from the white colonizer to the brown colonizer, except that this time the colonizer was the native himself. So that's the answer.
Well, do you think the whole, this process left behind generations with the concept that if you need to advance in life, in society, socially, you need to ape the white man?
Correct.
Dressing,
Correct.
education, culture, practices, lifestyle.
Correct.
And maybe lost or forgot to realize that you, the Bharatiya, the
Correct.
original Bharat culture and education was stronger and superior to that.
Correct. So when you tell this to people, they'll say, if it was so strong, why did it fall? Why was it defeated so often? Well, how do you know it was defeated so often? Because we're still around. How many cultures can you show which were subject of colonization, which are still around? We are the only indigenous culture to survive at such large numbers with an independent country, and which is the world's largest democracy, 7th largest country in the world. How do you explain this then? So did we lose or did we manage to survive, which nobody else has? Second, if you and I were to carry on the very same conversation in a Bharatiya language, we would be accused of spreading some kind of saffron propaganda. So to actually reach out to this section, we have to speak in English. That's the unfortunate reality. And a lot of people say that, but for the Englishman, we were different cultures, and India is the product of a synthetic exercise. It has nothing organic or natural about it, because we never had a common tongue and we could never speak with each other. I would like to actually throw this question sitting in the land of spices. This land, which is called the Parashurama Kshetram, has been exporting spices to Rome for centuries now. So Malayalis were comfortable talking to Romans, but Tamilians and Malayalis would not speak with each other because neither of them knew English. Look at the stupidity of the argument here, right? So I think there is a lot that we don't know. The education system has systematically injected cultural, civilizational and religious amnesia in the entire society as a whole. And I'm trying to hit the reset button. And I'm saying we don't need to go back to everything as it was, but we certainly don't need to forget everything that we were, because even today, the West is trying to appropriate our own techniques under different brands and labels, and it tries to sell it back to us. So perhaps mine is a squirrel's contribution in the larger exercise.
There's a very popular saying in Malayalam, Saipine Kanambol Kavata Marika. Basically, this is pre-gender sensitive days when they said, you see a white man and you get overwhelmed.
Right.
That's exactly the complex they managed to instill in us.
Correct. 100% yes, 100% yes. So, the superiority of the white complexion has a deeper psychology to it, and it also has a deeper religious significance in Christian European theology. And that is precisely why representations of their sacred beings are typically, white in color. The surprising part is, all these questions are being comfortably asked in continents such as Africa and Australia and New Zealand, without anybody accusing them of fascism of any sort. Africans are questioning the history that was handed down to them by the British colonizer. In Kenya, Nigeria, and all these countries, they're trying to revive their native systems. Africans seem to be much more confident of reviving their own traditions and questioning the history of the colonizer than Indians, and we are supposed to be apparently a much more advanced civilization that actually calls into question our notions of superiority. 2, the first book is actually an attempt at demonstrating the hypocrisy here, to say, why is it that the West is comfortable accepting indigenous movements in the African continent, but has a serious problem accepting a similar or an identical movement in the Indian subcontinent? And I think there is a clear reason for it. Because Africa today is divided between two faiths, which are fighting over resources and territory. And therefore the original religious systems of that continent are actually a minority. So whether they stand a chance to succeed or not, we don't know. But we are still at least 1 billion in the world. That means we are at least 16% of the world's population at the very least. So we can't be ignored, and which is why we are the subject of multiple such attacks, cultural, civilizational, social, economic and whatnot. So according to me, the colonizer may have left, but his agenda still continues, and globalization is the weapon.
Spoke about Bharat, you mentioned nothing other than Bharat. Why is it Bharat scorned off by the so-called intellectuals?
Because Bharat has a very clear association with Hindu scripture. It finds mention in Hindu scripture. And the introduction and inclusion of Bharat as part of Article 1 of the Constitution was on the basis of Hindu scripture. When Dr. Ambedkar was presented with evidence as to why this must be called Bharat, he reluctantly but finally agreed, and he worked out a compromise.
India that is
India
Bharat.
that is Bharat, as opposed to plain Bharat. Therefore, their problem is the retention of the Hindu identity through a constitutional provision which deals with the naming of this land and this country. In fact, if you look at some of the resolutions that were passed by the Constituent Assembly, one of the resolutions clearly says that this is not a new country, but it is a successor state to an old civilization. And this recognition irks them because they want to continue perpetuating the theory that we never existed as a society, as a culture, as a civilization or a nation prior to the British colonizer or the white colonizer. And the most recent statement to have been made on these lines is by Mr. Dilip Cherian, who is supposed to be the intellectual of the Congress. And if you listen to what he has to say, he actually calls this a temporary arrangement.
Okay.
He calls India a temporary arrangement. So I'd like to understand what is the consequence of that statement and what is he trying to imply? Is he therefore saying that India is not going to be permanent? Therefore, what is the game plan here? So there is a very clear collaboration between intellectuals of this sort and certain political outfits, which is the unfortunate reality of contemporary Bharat.
Well, cutting south as a narrative, the so-called new narrative saying that North Indians are,
Right.
discriminating against South Indians, and we need to
Right.
come up with this cutting south theory.
I think this is the product of investment at least since the mid-19th century, where the poison called Dravidianism was sowed in the seeds of southern Bharat. Dravida as a word has always been used in a geographical sense, which means a peninsula, a land body surrounded by water on three sides. It never had a racial connotation, it never had an ethnic connotation. So I've said this before and I will repeat it, that perhaps the most pernicious, long-term, devastating movement for Bharat's integrity is the Dravidianist movement. It's not even Kashmir militancy, because Kashmir militancy wears an AK-47 openly. So it's easy to understand who the enemy is. But when somebody is wielding the pen, and he does so for 200 years, then he has silently brainwashed an entire population for generations that they don't belong to this country. There was no such divide before. This is an artificial divide. We have pilgrimage as a way of uniting this country, which is why we have the Char Dham Yatra, where people from the north come to the south and people from all parts of the country go to all other parts of the country. When Sri Adi Shankara, who according to me was the original true blue Malayali, established the four mathas, he did not limit it to only the south. Clearly, culturally and spiritually, we have seen this as one unit. And when everybody else was referring to Bharat or India, they knew what was the specific geography that they were talking about. Clearly, they did not say British South Asian Company. They said British East India Company or India Company. They were very clear what is India, what is its culture. So, when you continue to see this being spewed in contemporary discourse, I'm very clear that it reflects the continued success of the colonizer long before, or rather long after he has left the shores of Bharat, which is why I continue to question what is the significance of 15th of August 1947, when we may have achieved what is touted as political independence, but spiritually, civilizationally, mentally and psychologically, we're not free from the clutches of the white colonizer.
Three quick questions since your time is running out. One, what's your definition of secularism and why is it interpreted in different ways by different political parties?
Secularism was never supposed to be included in the constitution because precisely it is capable of multiple definitions and it could be used in mischievous ways, which is what they thought and which is exactly what has happened since 1947. Secularism, according to me, should have never been included as part of our discussions, and it should have never been included through the 42nd Amendment in 1976, which it was done unconstitutionally and surreptitiously during the emergency, for that matter, between 75 and 77. Two, either we should junk it as a concept, or if we wish to retain it, we should basically redefine it to say that this civilization has a core identity, which is the Sanatana Dharmic identity, and it is comfortable treating everybody else with equal rights as long as they don't pose a threat to the Sanatana identity and they don't pit themselves against the interests of the native faith system and the native culture of this land. That, I think, should be the way forward in terms of how do you define Bharatiya secularism or Hindu secularism.
You've traveled across the length and breadth of the country and you're familiar with Kerala, its culture, its claim
Yes.
of being number one in many fields, including literacy, this and that.
Right.
And you've seen what the transformation that has happened to Uttar Pradesh.
Right.
What is it that Kerala missed and UP gained?
I don't want to resort to the comparison because it reinforces the north-south divide. All I will say is that Kerala has a lot of inherent strengths. They are among the sharpest people I have met. And some of the most die-hard Hindus are from Kerala. Kerala's contribution to Bharat and its Sanskriti is as much as Kashmir or any other part of Bharat. So I'm more interested in reviving the latent entrepreneurial hardworking spirit of Kerala to ensure that nobody points fingers at the Kerala model in a negative way. I want to congratulate Keralites at having preserved nature so well here. But I would also want to say that it's time that they made their presence felt in the overall contribution of Bharat's, let's say, economic growth journey. And two, clearly they are capable of succeeding like nobody's business when you look at the success of the Malayali diaspora in the rest of the world, whether it's in the Gulf or in the US or any other part of the world. So that means clearly the government here or successive governments here have not provided sufficient reasons for Keralites to stay back and succeed in their own motherland. And I know for a fact that they love Kerala like nobody else. They love the water here, they love the rains here, they love nature here, which is why they continue to have a fantastic relationship back with their motherland. I just hope that we continue to give them very less reasons to emigrate out of Kerala, or at least out of Bharat, and they find reasons to stay back here.
I'm not a South Indian, I'm an Indian from the South.
Yes.
What made you say that?
I said that because I felt that there was an artificial divide being drawn between the North and the South, and therefore I wanted to first emphasize on the Indian identity across the board. But recently I changed that position to say I'm a Bharatiya from the South.
All right. Now, were you ready? I mean, you moved out of the engineering college to the IIT to learn law.
Right.
Said because you were scared that you will not get that freedom to express yourselves.
Right.
But were you ready then for this status, this iconic status, the star status, the most sought after speaker across the country, the way the social media goes viral? Of course, enough number of haters too.
This has never been the goal, consciously speaking. The idea was to be at least one of those voices that contributes to Bharat's reawakening in a calm fashion, with facts at my command and with some degree of confidence. Contrary to popular perception, I am not in the business of popularity, because when that becomes the goal, then the cause takes a backseat. I'm happy that social media has given me a certain advantage, which people better than me did not have in the previous generations. So I'm not sure what my position would have been had it not been for social media, because mainstream media would not have given me this position. That much I'm confident of. So the democratization of creation of public opinion through social media has single-handedly given people like me access to the minds of people. But more than anything else, the success of the books and the reception that my content gets across the board, notwithstanding criticism, proves that the society is ready for it. So I'm perhaps deriving advantage from being in the right time of history or at the right time in history, which perhaps the previous generation did not get. I'd like to say that this is my Shraddhanjali to all those giants who went unrecognized and who did much more stellar work. So I'm a pygmy standing on the shoulders of giants. I have nothing more to say.
Well, no 30-minute is good enough to keep talking to you. Maybe we'll keep reading and rereading these books and wait for the next one.
Sure.
And keep coming back to you. Thank you for speaking to the viewers of Janam. Nandi, namaskaram.
Namaskar. Thank you.